Landscaping with native plants for Willowsford. My name is Julie Borneman, and I own Watermark Woods, a native plant nursery in Hamilton, Virginia. And this class is really geared towards you guys and being able to kind of do it yourself landscaping at home. And I'm not a landscape designer. I know plants. I know what plants do well, but and I know what plants I like. So I've tried to help with design. I used to do some designing, but it really takes a lot of time. So part of the goal of this class is to really enable you guys to be able to choose plants for your own yard, pick things that are going to do well, pick things that you think look good, and be successful at that. And one of the things I deal with is native plants, and I know that native plants are a big priority for everyone at Willowsford. So I just want to give a quick kind of an intro into native plants, because I know not everyone is well versed in native plants and what that means to be a native plant. So I kind of like to start and talk about invasive species plants. So let me see if my thing will advance. There we go. So an invasive species is something that is not native to a particular area. So it has not evolved in an area. And a lot of times what we look for when we consider something invasive is how fast does it spread, and is there an economic impact from that species. And in the PowerPoint here, you see English ivy is this guy on the right. I think your right is the same as my right. And English ivy will climb up a tree and pull trees down, and it's very destructive. And another one, this one here is purple loosestrife, and you see that in a wetter area, and it just takes over and it makes this monoculture, and it doesn't have a lot of value for the wildlife in the area. So what it does is it displaces all of the native species, and it takes away all that food that could be available for wildlife. There's been a lot of stuff in the news lately about the insect apocalypse and how many bird species we're losing worldwide. It was something like 30% of all birds, and it's billions of birds that have been lost because their habitat has been lost, and they don't have the insects to eat, and the insects eat the plants, and some of the birds eat the plants. So it's really important to have these things that available as habitat where we're putting in things that are invasive or not necessarily have evolved here. So that leads us to ask, well, what is a native, and how do we know if something is native or not? So what I like to think of as native is we're here in the Piedmont region. You can see Loudon's kind of right there. And so the plants that I look for is if they're native in this Piedmont region. It's a very particular, it relates to soil type, it relates to climate, it relates to the geographic functions of the area, where we have like coastal plains, very different. I mean, that's a stark contrast between those two. So I look for plants that are native to a Piedmont region, and you're like, well, that's great, but how do I know if something's native to the Piedmont region? Oops, I'm all over the place here with my mouse, so forgive me and bear with me. Let's see if I can come this way. Keep losing it. All right, there we go. So this is just a screen grab from a web shot that I like to use called the Digital Atlas of the Virginia Flora, and the website is VA Plant Atlas, and if you just Google that, you'll find it. But what's really nice is up here you can search by botanical name, which is the Latin name, or you can change that to common name, and you can search by common name. And what it does then is it brings up a map of Virginia, and if there's a little red dot on your county, then you know that it's native to your county. So I use this all the time. People will ask me questions about plants, and there's thousands and thousands of plants, so I don't always know what's native. I know some of the basics. So I look it up here. So I use this plant atlas almost every day, and it's really handy. So check it out. You can search. You can even, if you don't know what something is, if you're really good at things, you can start to kind of identify it. If you know if it's a monocot or a dicot. This is the mosses. So you can key it out and try to identify plants, but that gets a little hard. So we talked a little bit about why using natives, because they're beneficial to the environment. They're also very economical. Because they've evolved here in Virginia, they don't need specific extra water. They will need water to get established, but they don't need, you know, all that extra care and feeding like you have to do with your lawn or your grass. But also they're naturally beautiful. And if you get the right mix of natives, your yard will be beautiful. And it gives you kind of a sense of place. You know, we a lot of times, you know where you are by what flora is around you. You know, you're in Hawaii, you want to see palm trees, you don't want to see oak trees. And these are two pictures from McGee Design. John McGee's a local landscape designer. He's very good. He's out of Middleburg, and this is the red flower here on the right is wild columbine. That's our native columbine. Aquilegia canadensis is the Latin name. And down here is Tiarella, which is another spring bloomer. Both of these bloom in the spring. A Tiarella cordifolia. The common name is foam flower. And it's beautiful. It's a runner. It'll do a nice ground cover like we see here. This little guy here is the Carolina chickadee. And if you've ever seen Doug Tallamy speak, he does a great story about the Carolina chickadee, which really kind of drives home why we need to plant native plants. And the Carolina chickadee feeds its young on caterpillars. That's the only thing that they can feed their babies, soft, squishy baby food. So they forage for caterpillars, and they have to find between 300 and 600 caterpillars every day for their clutch of maybe 3 to 5 babies. And they found chickadee nests that have not been successful, and their bellies are full of birdseed. So they're trying to feed them whatever they can if they can't find the caterpillars. And you know, we're not seeing as many caterpillars around as we used to. You know, when I was a kid and we drive along the country roads, we'd get home and the windshield would be just covered in bugs. And I don't see that as much anymore. So we're losing a lot of our insects, a lot of our caterpillars, just a lot of habitat is going away. So it's important for us to try and bring this habitat into our own yards and bring nature to us, rather than isolating it out into parks and, you know, places that we go to. You know, nature is all around us, and we need to learn to live harmonious with nature. So 3 of my favorite natives. I just like to throw that in there to kind of get us started. The first one here with the whitish flower is called Rattlesnake Master. And anytime someone comes into the nursery with a little boy, they love to get Rattlesnake Master. And it doesn't look like it would support a lot of pollinators, but it does get covered with bees. They go to these white flowers here, and somehow they get the nectar and the pollen out of there. It's just a very cool plant. The second one is called Spigelia marylandica, or Indian pinks. And it's a spring bloomer. It's very pretty, great for hummingbirds if you like hummingbirds. It's part shade, part sun, really nice plant. And the last one is bottle gentiana. This one's a cultivar called True Blue. Thoreau wrote about it, saying that it's the only true blue that he's seen in nature. So those are kind of 3 of my favorite flowers, just to get us going here. And you know, we talk about natives and how important it is to grow natives, but every year I go to garden centers all over the place, and I find this list, particularly in garden centers here in our county, that you can still buy some of these awful invasives. Like Bradford pear, we see displacing natives all over the place. It creates huge monocultures. It's all up and down the roadways. We see it all over the place. There's only 2 that people really plant a lot in their yard that I tell people to pull out. The first one I'll tell you about right now, and the second one I'll bring up later, but the first one is butterfly bush. And I bring that up because we talk a lot about food. We plant these plants because they're food for insects and they're food for the local wildlife. But butterfly bush, everyone says, oh, I want a pollinator garden and I need to have a butterfly bush. I know that that's a great one for butterflies. Well, so yes, the butterflies like butterfly bush. However, it's not the right food at the right time. So it's not giving them the right protein and sugar quantities that they need to make their migrations. It's like us, you know, if you gave me a salad bar, but there was also brownies at the end of the salad bar, I'm very likely to put just a little bit of salad on my plate and the rest of it with brownies, because that's one of my favorites. So if I could eat chocolate all the time, I would, but it's not what's good for me, which is just like butterfly bush. It's like candy for the butterflies, and they don't get what they need from it. So let's talk about choosing native plants and choosing plants for our gardens and what we need to think about. And these may seem very no-brainer to you, but really think about the light. How much light does it get? They say full sun, usually you see on a plant tag, full sun is 6 to 8 hours a day. Full shade is 6 to 8 hours of shade a day. And part sun to part shade is in between there. So a lot of people come in and they'll say, well, I have part shade. And you know, it gets shade in the morning, but then from about 10 o'clock to 7 o'clock, it's full sun until the sun goes down. Well, that would be considered full sun. So really think about it. You could also, you know, take pictures of your site at different times of the day and really kind of map out where the light goes. Moisture is another one. Is it consistently moist? Is it well drained? Is it one of those things that's only wet in the spring but it's dry in the summer? That would be considered a rain garden habitat. And then what's the soil like? Everybody says, I can't grow anything because my soil is dry Virginia clay. Well, here's some mind-boggling news, is that Virginia clay is what these native plants have evolved in. So they do great in our Virginia soil because that's what they know, and that's where they've grown for eons. And then microclimates. You know, when you put a house up, you create little microclimates. You know, by your AC unit or where your downspout goes. Now you've got a little wet area, or you've got an area that's windy because the AC unit's blowing on it. So think about those microclimates, and you know, it's not just your yard, and we live in the Piedmont region, but I may have like a little boggy area in the Piedmont region because this is where my sub pump drains, or you know, whatever. So think about those things as well. And then think about the space, not just how much space you have, because that's important. Think about your square footage, but also what kind of space are these plants going to take up? Not just what does it look like now, but what is it going to look like in 3 years, in 10 years, in 5, you know, whatever. So think about those requirements as well. So we're going to get down to the nitty gritty here, and we're going to start talking about some of the pictures that you guys have sent in. And got a lot. Last year, we only had a couple, and I'm going to warn you right now, some of these, it's a lot of fun, but I don't do this for anybody but Willisford. So you guys are special. This is a really fun one. So the first one comes from Dottie Kilcar, and I hope that I'm saying that right. And Dottie sent us pictures of her front yard. You can see she's got like a swale here where the drainage is. And I think that the area that's concerning is right here where it's sloping. So that would, to me, would be kind of a rain garden area because it's wet, but it's also very dry. Dottie said that there's very little grass, it's rocky, and by mid-June nothing grows because it's so dry. And she's concerned about erosion. And it's the front of your house, it's street side, so you can't just have like a mess of meadow there. So so I did not do a design for Dottie, but I did come up with some examples. So what Dottie's thinking of, that area there is very typical rain garden, stormwater management. You can't mess with it too much, but it's nice to kind of slow that water down and keep it on your property so that it sinks in and it keeps your water table healthy. It's going to be better for your grass. It's going to be better for everybody's wells. I don't know if you guys are on wells there or not, but what I would suggest to Dottie is that you would go to a landscape designer or someone who's certified. They have Chesapeake Bay landscape professionals who have certified at different levels to create rain gardens and naturescapes, and it's all heavily regulated through the Chesapeake Bay Act. And do something that's a rain garden. You could do something that's a little kind of free-flowing like this. They put in black-eyed Susans here. Here's a non-native sedum. This looks to me like it could be some form of our native hyssop. This is our panicum or panic grass. And this is another, maybe a goldenrod type there. So there's a lot of options. Another thing you could do is build a dry stream bed with some grasses along the side. This looks like it's early in spring, so they've cut down a lot of the grasses. Put some river birch in there, make it look very intentional. Make that water have a place to go. These grasses out here are gonna slow the water down, let it sink in a little bit better, keep your soil more healthy, cool things off. River birch, they grow anywhere. They like it wet, they'll grow in dry, they'll grow at the top of the hill. They're a fantastic tree, and they have a lot of interest because they have that peely bark. So it'll provide some privacy as well. And then the last one is kind of the beginnings of a rain garden where they really cut into their yard. So it's something different. And you can see down here, they've got a curb cut. So not only are they getting the runoff from their yard through here, but they're also getting it from the street. So they're really performing some good ecosystem services there and taking care of some of that stormwater for other areas. Now, I'll pause just a second. I don't see anybody see a hand raised or anything. So if there's no questions. Oh, here we go. Amanda. All right, Amanda, you're allowed to talk if you wanted to ask a question. I think you have to unmute yourself as well.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, I love these ideas, actually, they're wonderful. I'm just wondering if Willowsford HOA would have an issue with us having that in the front yard. And I know you probably wouldn't know, but I'm asking if anybody in the group knows, because our front yard faces Trailhead, which is the main arterial road in the Grove at Willowsford. So that's all I want to know, because I would love to do something like this in our front yard.
So Iris is on, and I'm sure she can speak to that better.
Okay, yeah, I can jump in. And so this is Iris. And so the HOA permits use of native plants in Willowsford. And as you know, we have the landscape review process. So basically what you can do is you can think about what you'd like to do and talk to the HOA and go through the landscape design process or review process. But generally, I think the HOA is very open to landscaping with native plants.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, you know, I've worked with several HOAs on panels and stuff, and I think part of the, you know, the biggest hurdle is just opening that door and saying, here's what we want to do and here's why we want to do it. You know, stormwater management, habitat restoration, and you can always work with them, and usually there's some sort of middle ground where the HOAs are happy to have you help with stormwater management, because they, I don't know if the HOAs get credit, habitat what do they call it, stormwater management credits, or if the county does. But a lot of times, you know, there's a lot of ways to work around that. And, you know, if you can make it look managed, that goes a long way for an HOA to make it look intentional and managed and nice and pretty. They'll usually be happy to help out with that. All right, is there, let's see. Randy.
Julie, I think they have an, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Randy, are you there? Randy Pamula.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I had one quick question about the picture that you showed previously, and maybe this is more for, I think her name is Iris. So we actually have some water runoff concerns and issues on our property because of the way it slopes. And we would like to do some intentional river rock design to kind of manage a collection of that water. But I've heard, and I thought that I saw in the design review book that the river rock was not allowed. Is that true, or does it just have to go through the design review process to get approved?
Okay, and so this is Iris again, and so I'm with Willowsford Conservancy, so I'm not with the HOA. What I would recommend is contacting the HOA and, you know, basically asking a question, and they are always very, very willing to discuss that with you. So I'm not sure about your question specifically, but I would not hesitate contacting them and asking the questions, and I'm sure they'll provide some guidelines.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I am referring to those type of rocks that you're showing there on the slide. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Thanks, Randy. All right, I am going to continue on here. So I wanted to talk about actually that picture we just looked at, and they have the grasses there, and they were all cut back. And this is one of the grasses that is used a lot in landscaping. Pink muley grass. It's very pretty and very showy, and it looks very nice. And I bring this slide up because I do think it's very important for us to think about how much maintenance we want in our landscaping when we're picking these plants. So the grasses are fantastic. We all love to use them, but I would encourage you to try and leave them up through winter. You'll get a lot of enjoyment out of them through winter. Oops, I went too far. So especially if it snows and the only thing left up is the top of those seed heads, you will just see a ton of birds on them eating them. And then when it comes to spring, wait till spring to cut them back. And a lot of insects will overwinter in those stems as well. So I think that's just a really nice way to provide habitat, and it looks nice. You don't have to have quite that much. That's a long stretch of pink muley grass there. So we're going to continue on, and we're going to look at John O'Connor's yard. I don't know if John is on or not, but John has this island. He says he wants to make it a little more distinctive and butterfly, hummingbird / pollinator friendly. What native shrubs and perennials might go well, especially if he was to enlarge the area? It's sun all day and has a slight slope. So the first thing that I was looking at in this, there's some stuff going on in the background here. There's some houses, there's some power lines. He may want to start to camouflage that a little bit. And those trees will eventually, they look like, just your typical cedars that everybody installs. And this is probably what it's going to look like in about 5-6 years. Those are going to grow. The maple tree there is going to grow. I think those trees are a little too close together. If it was me, I would spend the muscle energy and separate those trees out a little bit. And here's what I would do with that area. So I would separate those trees. I would keep the little bench there. These two shrubs back here are viburnums. So there's a lot of viburnums. There's some that take full sun, some that can take a fair amount of, but they add a lot of interest in that they have spring flowers and some really good fall color. And then this is kind of late spring-ish that this picture is depicting. This flower here is tiarella, or foam flower, and this is an aster, and this is goldenrod. So these are late season flowers. They add a lot of habitat for wildlife. And we've got some phlox back here, and then back here we've got geranium maculatum, which will have a pink flower in late spring. So I liked this picture when I did it, but then I changed my mind and I decided this was too dense back here. I thought this was too dense of a wall. That may be what you want, John O'Connor, but maybe you want something a little bit lighter. So what I did then is I took those two shrubs out and I decided, let's try serviceberry. Serviceberry has white flowers in the spring and berries in June. It's a great for birds. If you're a birder, you can sit on this bench and you can watch birds come and go from here all summer long eating the berries. So you can see in spring the phlox is blooming, and you've got your tiarella blooming, and so you've got some interest in the spring. In the summer, the tiarella will stop and you'll have your asters and goldenrod. And then we repeated asters and goldenrod back here. And here's your geranium maculatum, which blooms late spring and into summer. But every season you've got interest. You still have your evergreen trees here, which are non-native, which do provide some screening. And people always say they want evergreen for screening, but in the winter, when these lose their leaves, your eye is going to stop at these sticks. So don't be limited to evergreens when you're thinking about screening material. You can go with a river birch. People's eye are going to stop at that river birch and not go past it. Once we've got these shrubs here, you can still see the power lines, but you really don't notice them. Your focus is back in here where the shrub, where the little bench is. Any questions about this one? I have two screens and it is painful to switch between two screens with my mouse. There we go. All right, I don't think I see any hands, so we will continue on. Okay, that's summer. So next up is Chase Rowan. So I had to laugh at this picture because we had a very similar picture last year, and I'm going to bring that up a little bit. I'm not sure what all these shrubs are in here, but there's some grasses up here. It looks like Chase likes evergreen things. I think those are all meant to be evergreens. And this next slide shows the picture from last year. It's funny because it's a very similar, you know, house with the line there. And I will show you what we did to that house last year, and then I'll show you what I had for Chase. So that other house had another one of those evergreen trees in there, so we moved that out from the foundation because it was just too close. We extended this downspout here out a ways because it was just too close to the house, just ending right there. So there's this is spring, summer, and fall. So in the spring, we put some oak leaf hydrangeas in there. And this is a Muhlenbergia capillaris. That's that pink muhly grass that I showed you the photograph of earlier. And then phlox. You're going to see me use a lot of phlox tonight because that's one of my favorite plants. This is Phlox subulata, or moss phlox. It comes in every color under the sun. There's even one that is white with pink stripes on the leaves. And it's evergreen, which is one of the reasons that I love it, and it's creeping. So eventually this whole area will be filled in with phlox, and these hydrangeas are going to grow up a little bit. So you're only going to be mulching this little area really between the house and where the shrubs start. This isn't going to need mulch at all because it's all going to be filled in with phlox. So you've got color in the spring, white in the fall, in the summer, and your pink muhly grass in the fall. So that's the house from last year, just because I thought it was very similar. So what I did with Chase's landscaping, the darker mulch is the original mulch, and then I enlarged that bed quite a bit here because this space, I guess that's no fun to mow. So if you can get rid of those little tight corners or right angles, it's a lot easier to get your mowing done. So here we are in the spring, and we have added, so this is leucothe bush or dog hobble. It grows in shade to part shade. And it'll creep. So these will fill in pretty well here. Some of them have a spread even up to 10 feet. So you could get away with maybe one and it would spread all over the place in there. And then I put bluebells in there because it looks to me like this is probably a space that stays fairly moist, doesn't dry out. Not really a wet spot, but maybe doesn't dry out. So I put some bluebells in there. And then this is Caltha palustris, or marsh marigold, because the downspout is here. So if you can bring that downspout out just a little bit, the marsh marigold likes wet, doesn't have to be wet all the time. It can grow just fine in dry soil, but it flowers in the spring. So in the spring, you've got my favorite phlox here again, and this marsh marigold will be actually late spring and into summer. Bluebells, they are an ephemeral, which means they'll flower in the spring and then they go dormant for the summer. And then this, I think, is a very underutilized landscape plant. That is this one, blueberries, high bush blueberry, or low bush. You can put a lower one in there too. But blueberries are great landscaping plants. And since you're right here by the downspout, it should get just enough water that it needs over the spring. And you can get the berries from it, or you can let the birds have it. But blueberry bushes also have great fall color. And you'll notice I really didn't mess a whole lot with the existing landscape that was here, because I think these are junipers. You know, they'll grow and they'll spread and they'll fill in. They're fairly innocuous. They're not considered invasive or anything. And I'm going to assume that these are native grasses. So it looked good. But one of the other things that I noticed was there was some splash up on the wall here. So I erased that. And but putting mulch in through there and really extending that down is going to help a lot with preserving the siding and whatever on your house so that it doesn't deteriorate any faster. Any questions on the landscape for Chase? Let's see if I can not seeing any. Keeps telling me I have my hand raised, which is funny.
Okay, Julie, we
Yeah.
have one question that came in on the chat
Okay.
question.
Cool.
And the question is, wouldn't having berries by the house also invite pests?
Well, not necessarily, because berries, pests like rats and mice or whatever, they aren't going to go after blueberries. It's really the birds will come and get those and take care of them before anything else comes. And if you're thinking like ants or insect pests like that, they're probably, that's only if the berries fall to the ground and go rancid. I'm going to guess that that's not going to happen. If you've got some habitat around there, you're going to have insects visiting all these other native flowers. And I have not come across that problem. All right, and I'll just say also, my email is julie@watermarkwoods.com. If you have other questions, you can email me, and we have been really busy this year, but I've been pretty good about getting to emails within a day or two. So I'm happy to answer questions, you know, or you can come in and we can chat. People bring photos all the time. And although right now with the 6-foot distance, it's a little bit harder, you can email me your photos and we can talk about it. But we're always happy to answer questions like that too here. So Amanda Mason. Amanda's sending a lot of photos. And there's a lot of areas here that I think would be really fun to tackle. But my first bit of advice for Amanda is pick one. It can get so overwhelming, especially when you're moving into a new house and you have all this blank slate, or if you're moving into someone else's house and they've done all this crazy landscaping and you just don't like any of it. The best thing to do is just pick what you can live with and tackle, you know, live with it for as long as you can and tackle some other area. You know, there's some great areas here for phlox, maybe a couple evergreen shrubs. That like this little tree here, I would leave that there. It's going to be pretty. It adds a nice softening. It's not a native evergreen, but plant some ground cover around there. I think the best thing to do is maybe mulch into there and plant some ground cover. These might be azaleas, maybe some boxwoods there. Sometimes it's hard to tell from the plants. So I decided I was going to pick one space in Amanda's yard here and do that up. And so the one that I chose was the porch here, because there's another, somebody sent in one early this week and I didn't have time to do a whole lot with it. But this was kind of similar to what Amanda had, but I felt like there's a lot of potential in this area because it looked like this might be where the water runs, and they're seeming to have a hard time growing grass there. It's probably a hard place to mow. They've already moved the downspouts. They're draining elsewhere, but this is a place where you're sitting here, you're looking out, and you want to see something pretty. You want to be able to see, you know, the birds or the pollinators, but you also want to make sure that this area is getting managed as well. So I haven't done a whole lot with that because it's kind of the rain garden type area, and stormwater management I tend to shy away from just because it can be so tricky, and a lot of times you have to get special permissions from the county when you're dealing with where water flows. So there's a lot to do with that. But I did want to tackle this landscaping area right in front of the area. So these shrubs here, there's 3 or 4 of them there. That is Ilex glabra shamrock, which is inkberry. Now, normal inkberry gets like maybe 10 foot tall. And this is a dwarf cultivar called Shamrock, which stays low. It's evergreen. It has dark colored berries in the fall. And the legend is that Thomas Jefferson used the ink from inkberry to write the Declaration of Independence. So right there, you've got a great story. The shrub in the middle is kind of an accent shrub. It's called Fothergilla or witch alder. And I chose a dwarf variety. There's a dwarf variety called Mount Airy. And that's what I would put there so that you're really not blocking your view at all. And then I thought, here I've got an aster and there's goldenrod, and then here's some phlox. Now, you could swap up that phlox and put in something like butterfly weed. Depending on how steep the slope is here, butterfly weed does like it well drained. But then you've got a milkweed if you're into monarchs. So you've got late season nectar sources with the asters and the goldenrod. And I think when you're in a neighborhood or you're doing your front yard where people are going to see it a lot of times, look for those cultivars that stay well managed. So for this goldenrod, there's a couple of cultivars that look exactly like that. They stay really short, very tidy. They stay in their clump. There's one called Golden Fleece. There's one called Little Lemon. There's Little Susie. There's, oh my gosh, there's a ton of them. I can't even remember them all, but there's a lot of little ones. You could, if you wanted to break this up a little bit more, you could do a little bit bigger shrub here. You could do something like 9-bark, which gets 6 feet, or, oh, I can't think of any others right now, but there's a lot of choices. So what I think is important is kind of the structure. And I picked plants for full sun because this looked very sunny to me. If it were shady, it would be a whole different plant palette, but you could still go with kind of the same layout. You know, alternate a couple things here to give you, the phlox will give you spring color, the goldenrod and the asters give you fall color. Yeah, let's make those asters bloom. And then the phlox goes, they did not deadhead these, that's why they're brown. They shouldn't be brown like that in the fall. But, and they stay green all winter. So there's a lot of interest there and a lot that you can do with some space like that. Are there any questions about this one? All right, we're going to continue on. And you can always email me with questions as well. So Todd Somer sent in a few pictures as well. And I'm going to give Todd the same advice as Amanda is pick one place and go for that. And it looks like you kind of have 2 places here, the front of the yard and the back of the yard. And I wanted to tackle the front since the last one was kind of a backyard. In here, I'm guessing this looks pretty shady to me. So I would add maybe a shrub there and just focus on ground cover. I can't stress enough ground cover, ground cover, ground cover, because we spend so much money on mulch. And mulch is great when you're establishing plants. It's good for some borders, but the less we have to mulch, the less maintenance, the more time we're outside enjoying our families and whatever. So I tried to focus on this area here in Todd's house, just to the right of his front door. It looks to have partial shade because there's a tree here, some sort of a fruit tree, cherry tree maybe. And also key that we have to note is that they have a problem with deer and rabbits. So even though this is west and south, I'm guessing it gets some early afternoon sun, and then some shade in the afternoon. So I tried to pick some plants that got a mix of sun and shade that could handle a variety of conditions. And here's what we did. So, oh, I want to go back one. So this plant here is the other plant. In the beginning, I said there was 2 plants that I would recommend you rip out, and one of them is butterfly bush. I think it's a little hard to tell from the picture, but I think this is the other one, Nandina. So Nandina domestica, or heavenly bamboo. The landscapers love it because it is it can go full sun to mostly shade. It's evergreen. It has beautiful red leaves in the fall, and it has beautiful bright red berries. However, those red berries are toxic to a lot of our native birds. They have cyanide in them. So the birds eat them and then they die. So that's the other shrub that if you have Nandina, or they call it heavenly bamboo, get rid of it. It's not worth it to have that around. So I conveniently erased it. You can see here I erased it. I put in a little rock wall so that we kind of hid that. And then this shrub here is a cultivar of 9-bark called Tiny Wine. And it's fantastic because it has purple leaves, which is really unusual. And I don't know that those purple leaves have a lot of wildlife value, but they are very pretty and they make a statement. The flowers certainly have benefits to the pollinators. So, and it's a really nice statement. Tiny Wine only gets maybe 4 foot tall, so I think it's going to come up to right underneath his windows when it's full grown. And then I filled in around it with white or blue wood aster. There's a white wood aster and a blue wood aster, depending on what colors you like. And the wood asters are good for shade to mostly sun, and they'll fill in. So they'll fill in this whole space, and it'll look like a skirt around this 9-bark. And 9-bark has this beautiful peely bark in the winter. So when these all die back, you're going to see that bark. It's going to be beautiful. And then I added 2 of those Ilex glabra shamrock, the inkberries here at the corners. You might want to add one on the other side of this step just for repetition, because I think that that evergreen is valuable and it hides the downspout. I would also move the downspout out a little bit. And then the plants I used here, this is green and gold, which is a very low growing plant. It does die back in the winter, but it blooms in the spring, these pretty yellow flowers like you see, and it stays in a clump, but that clump just gets bigger and bigger over time. And then intermixed with the green and gold, I put in gentian. That was one of those things from the very first slide with the blue flowers that I said Thoreau talked about. There's also a version of that flower that is closed gentian, and it's really cool because the flowers never open. They kind of stay like this. And the only thing that can pollinate that flower is a bumblebee, because it's the only thing that's strong enough to pry open those petals, and it goes in there and buzzes around and pollinates it and then leaves. And if you've ever seen that, it's really cool. I think I got a video of it a couple years ago that might be on my blog, which is kind of cool. So that's what that looks like in the spring. And then summer into fall, these asters are going to be blooming back here, and your gentian are going to bloom in the summer, early summer. So any questions about Todd's landscape? All right, continuing on. So this is, Laura sent hers in just this week. So I really didn't have a chance to kind of mull things over and design some stuff. So that was a little hard. But the things that kind of stuck out to me, like Laura, you have this area that was a lot like, I think, Amanda's porch. You know, you could use some of those.
Hi, Julie.
Yeah?
Julie? Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I think we have one raised hand here. It's Megan.
Oh, yeah.
Can we let Megan talk a little? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me, oh, there you go.
Hi there. Yeah, I just had a question about the green and gold.
Yeah.
I tried to research native ground covers, and I came across green and gold as an option, but it looks like you were suggesting it or using it in a different way. Would you say it is a good ground cover? We have a more shaded area on the side of the house. We're having issues with drainage and a lot of mulch, so we were trying to think about what we could put in so the mulch didn't just run off.
It is a great ground cover. And that's why I had it kind of towards the front, because it's very low. So it's a great ground cover. It's pretty deer resistant. And it just goes. It's very reliable. It doesn't need a whole lot of care. And when it's happy, it makes a really attractive ground cover.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it is a good choice as a ground cover.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Anyone else? All right. So Laura's landscape, I would just maybe look at the photos from before for that one. And then this area, I do think is a lot like John O'Connor's yard with the 2 trees. And these look to be spaced maybe a little bit better, but they still look a little bit close to me. but I don't know that I would want those trees either. This is a pretty view. I don't know what's going to be growing back there, but that might block some of your view. So it looks like, you know, you watch the storms roll in or the wild cherry trees bloom. So that might be something to consider, you know, maybe slide one over here closer to where your neighbors are and block them a little bit more. But then this, oops, not sure what I did there. So this area here, you've got a good start here. You've got some phlox, maybe, my favorite. But I would add ground covers. You've got some good structure in there. You could add some ground covers, maybe a tree out here. Serviceberry's a nice tree that doesn't get huge, or a redbud or a dogwood, something that's gonna have some flowers in the spring and some, you know, something a little bit different. You know, up here, I do think it's worth landscaping, making that into a bed to make it look more intentional. Grass is always hard. Whenever I'm doing a new bed, what I like to do is I get in there with the weed whacker, I whack it down to the ground as much as I can, and then I'll put down a layer of cardboard and then mulch. And that cardboard does a really good job for about 2 years keeping the weeds out. But the worms and the microbes in the soil love to eat that cardboard. So not only are you now taking responsibility for all of your Amazon boxes, but you're also feeding the soil and making really good healthy soil just from cardboard. Any questions about this one? All right. So Brenda just sent in some questions. So she had a couple questions, all sun all day, and what to do about Virginia clay, what to do about deer, and some summer or fall colors. So we talked a little bit about Virginia clay and what that means and what it is. I do think a lot of times we get into this, especially in new developments, you know, you get into these subdivisions where a lot of your topsoil has been removed and they leave us with like the clay and not when there's no topsoil there. I think it's worthwhile to amend the soil. You could just use something as simple as leaf mulch. Is fantastic for breaking that up, and it doesn't take long. Native plants, if you put native plants into that Virginia clay, if you pick some that are good with adverse conditions, hardy, like black-eyed Susans, goldenrods, asters, they're really good at breaking up that clay. And once you have the plants growing there and you've got some leaf mulch in there or some mulch, as soon as that stuff starts to break down, you're getting organic matter into the soil, and the microbes will come and the worms will come, and it doesn't take long, and your soil will, the health will start to come back. And it's really cool to see when that happens. And deer, you know, I get deer at every talk I do, and there's only so much you can do for the deer. Sometimes you just gotta kind of figure, well, I'll plant for them and I'll plant for me. But for deer, there are plants that they don't like. I have a list here if you ever come into the nursery that I can give you. There's tons of lists. The Blandy Arboretum, on their website, they have a fantastic list of tried and true things with the deer. And they even break it out as things like the deer always eat this, the deer sometimes eat this, and the deer never eat this. So that's a really great list if you're looking for plants that the deer don't like. Another tip for deer, you know, sometimes like phlox. You know, I love phlox, and the garden phlox, you know, there's phlox comes in every different shape and size. Let's go on to my next slide, which is phlox. There is this phlox here, the paniculata garden phlox, gets a little bit taller. The deer love that one. They will just munch it down to the ground, and when it gets down to the ground, the rabbits will take over. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll plant right next to each other, or even in the same hole. They'll plant a plant of phlox and something like mountain mint, which the deer don't like, or phlox and monarda. Anything with a really strong smell to it, to the leaves especially, or with a texture to the leaves, the deer seem to leave alone. So I planted my mountain mint right next to my phlox, and the deer don't touch my phlox at all, and they walk past it constantly. So, you know, those are a couple things you can do to help with deer. But let's talk about phlox, because it is one of my favorites, and I always tell people, and now that I'm at home and he's here, I hope he doesn't hear me, but if you come into the nursery and my husband happens to be working and I'm not around, he's going to send you home with phlox, because it's such a go-to plant and it grows anywhere. So we've got this one that grows in full sun and gets 3 to 4 feet. Or we've got this one, comes in every color under the sun, grows in full sun, grows to 6 inches-ish is a good general height for that one. Or we've got phlox for shade. We've got many colors. Or there's this one in the shade that stays real low. That height is wrong. The stolonifera, and creeps in the shade. And there's all sorts of them in between. So there's a phlox for every part of your yard. You could have your whole yard be phlox if you wanted to. But it's so showy. You know, most of them bloom in the spring. These guys all bloom in the spring. This one blooms in the summer. You know, there's white ones, purple, pink, blue. So it can add a lot of color. It's just a good go-to plant. So I do love phlox, and I love to see it everywhere. Another one is black-eyed Susans. That one's kind of hit and miss with deer. But it's good for your summer color. So summer into fall, it can be hard. It seems like so much stuff blooms in mid to late spring, especially your shade plants, because that's when the shady areas get their light, is in the spring before the leaves come out. But you know, finding things that bloom that late time is hard. Rudbeckia, that's another one, all different heights. All different sizes of flowers, little flowers, big flowers. Great for pollinators. They love that one. That's another go-to. And I did mention mountain mint, and I think it's worth mentioning that if you have a place where you can put some mountain mint, do it, because it is always #1 on the pollinator list. And it's so good for pollinators. And people always say, oh, I don't want to attract bees to my yard. But when this is blooming, I can walk up to it and run my hand through it, and the pollinators don't care, because they're there for food. They don't care about protecting their nest. And it's so important that Mother Nature has created maybe 12 different varieties of mountain mint that are native to Loudoun County, and they all kind of bloom in succession. So there's always a mountain mint available for the pollinators. So, you know, we should just take that cue and try and bring some into our own yard. The one on the right is called short-tooth mountain mint, or Pycnanthemum muticum. That's the one that I probably sell the most of. The leaves are silvery. The flowers are a pale pink. This is probably a little late in the season to see what the flowers really look like. It's beautiful. The Native Americans use the leaves for tea. This one is Pycnanthemum tenuifolium, or narrowleaf mountain mint. You can see it's got a much finer foliage to the texture. The other question I always get about this one is, oh, it's so invasive, it's going to run. It's not in the same genus as your culinary mountain mints. So it's an aggressive plant, but it's not as aggressive as those culinary mints. And in fact, like I have a patch of it, and it spreads maybe 4 or 6 inches a year. It's not as aggressive as some other ones like bee balm or monardas, which people plant all the time and don't think about it being aggressive. In fact, I've got some mountain mint and some monarda growing next to each other, duking it out, and I'm afraid the monarda, the bee balm, is going to win. So another one I wanted to talk about is goldenrod. The deer don't touch it, so that will answer your deer question. And this slide and the next slide are your fall colors. These are those late fall bloomers that our migrating butterflies absolutely need. And goldenrod, everybody says, no, I'm allergic to goldenrod, I can't plant it. But goldenrod has very heavy pollen, so it falls to the ground, so there's no way for us to inhale goldenrod. But ragweed does have a very light pollen. It blooms at the same time as goldenrod. It's the same color as goldenrod. And so everybody gives goldenrod a bad rap because the ragweed is spreading pollen all over at the same time. But these are just the straight species goldenrods. They're not the cultivated varieties, but there are some really cool ones, like this white one, bicolor, grows in shade. This one, the blue stem goldenrod, also grows in shade. This spacellata, however you say that. It comes in some really cute cultivars that are low, but the regular species only gets to 2 feet anyway. It's very pretty, very managed. This zigzag goldenrod has really cool pendulous flowers poking out of the top. There's a few rugosas, one's called Fireworks, very long panicled flowers that look very graceful in the garden. There's a ton of goldenrods. The second one for fall color is the Asters, and they come in a variety of colors, variety of heights. There's a couple for shade. These two down here, the blue and the white, are for shade. They bloom in the fall in the shade, which is hard to find in the shade. And this one here is another one of my favorites, Iroquoides. There is one cultivar of this. It says 6 to 8 inches, maybe to 12 inches, but the cultivar Snow Flurries gets 6 inches tops. It is a low creeper. It's great for dry sun. A lot of times people will use it around their mailboxes. It's a creeper, so it'll fill in. You won't have to mulch around it. Heavy flowers in the fall. You can't even see the foliage. There's so many flowers. Any questions about some of those plants?
Julie, we had one question about the second mountain mint you mentioned. Like which one was that? I don't know if you remember.
Chrysanthemum tenuifolium, the narrow leaf mountain mint.
Okay. Great. And then we keep having a question. You know, you mentioned deer deterring plants. We also have questions if there are any plants that deter Japanese beetles.
Oh, well, so I know Japanese beetles they like some of the mallow plants, the marshmallow, some of those water-loving plants. They like roses. Most of the plants that we've talked about tonight, I have not seen Japanese beetles on them. So I'm not sure, as you know, they don't attract them, but as far as repelling them, I'm not sure. That one I don't know. I would have to maybe do some research to figure that out. So
great. And then we have some other questions. I don't know if you want to loop back to that now or later, but you mentioned river birch. And we had a question on whether there is a more compact variety that doesn't grow quite so large.
So there are. I'm not sure what they are, but there are some river birch that do grow smaller and tighter, and there's some even that don't have quite as much peeling on them. Some people just don't like that look. But I'm sure you can Google cultivars of river birch, and they're out there. You'll find them. Yeah. What other questions are there?
We have just one more that is a little bit unrelated, but somebody asked whether you could talk a little bit more about using cardboard, you know, like how much do you put on and how thick and so on.
Oh, yeah. So I usually just use one layer of the cardboard. Some people will also substitute newspaper. They'll do 6 to 8 layers of newspaper, but you know, we don't get a lot of newspapers anymore, but we get a heck of a lot of Amazon boxes. I do try to take the tape off because sometimes I'll go back to plant things later and you'll find the tape. The tape will still be there, just in the ground. It's kind of funny, but it's great. I am also a very impatient gardener. So when I decide that I want to create a new bed, I want it done yesterday. So I'll go out there the same day. I will put the cardboard down and I'll wet it a little bit just so that it stays in place and put the mulch on it. And then maybe the next morning I'll go and I'll cut an X in that cardboard and plunk my plants into there. Some people like to do the cardboard maybe in the fall and then do their planting in the spring, which is probably a better way to do it than my, you know, cutting little holes in the cardboard and shoving my plants in there. But I want it done now. So I'm just very impatient.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think that's all we have for right now.
All right. So I just wanted to go through a couple more plants that I really like. So the Tiarella cordifolia is a good ground cover for shade, and it's very fragrant. And a lot of times people ask me, what can they plant for hummingbirds in the shade? And this is a good one for shade for hummingbirds, as well as the wood asters that we talked about. Hummingbirds for sun, I mean, there's a million of them. The red cardinal flower is probably the best one, if just because that's a common question that comes up. And then I wanted to talk just quickly about ferns. There are tons of types of ferns out there, and some of them even take sun. So this eastern hay-scented fern will take some sun. I think ostrich fern can take a fair amount of sun. Christmas fern, this one is evergreen. And so is the eastern wood fern. So think about ferns in your yard. Not necessarily, they don't have flowers all the time, but they add a texture to your yard that really is different. And, you know, we could all have boxwoods just like everyone else, but think about using ferns. Even if you've got a sunny spot, people are like, wow, how do you get that to grow there? And don't share the secret that it likes sun. Heuchera is another great plant for the shade, and it comes in all sorts of crazy colors. This is what the straight species looks like. There's a lot of variation in the leaves, which is why they're able to find species of coral bells, which is the heuchera, and make these crazy things like lime ricky and blackberry crisp and fire alarm. But you know, when I'm looking at plants, I always want to ask, what's the wildlife value? And that's the book that I gave everyone that I think they're still distributing to a few people. But that book to me is like a Bible, because that tells me who I'm supporting. And if I plant this, am I going to find this beetle or this ant, or who's eating the leaf? Maybe you can figure that out from the book. Or I want to attract turtles. What can I attract turtles to my yard with? So heuchera, while these things don't have a whole lot of wildlife value, this one does. And if you're not into native plants yet, start with something like one of these cultivars of heucheras for it's a shady, kind of a shady plant. But it gets you into it, and it gets you started thinking, and you see how easy it is to grow them and how well they do in our soil, how much better they do than some other plants. So try some of these things out. All right, is there a couple questions we can go through? Because I think
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm monitoring. So there's a question here. Are ferns invasive? And you want to answer that?
it depends on the fern. Some of them are. So the one hay-scented fern, it's very aggressive. They're considering it invasive on up on the Appalachian Trail. They have some areas where it's just taken over and they can't manage it. But in your landscape, it's probably not going to do that, because it's not going to have the space. It's not going to compete with grass, so you won't find it in your lawn. So it just depends on the fern. Some of them can be very aggressive. Some of them are very timid ferns, and they don't go far at all.
Great, thank you. And then we have a comment from Laura, who commented on the cardboard, and she says there is a great YouTube video on bay-friendly landscaping to check out.
Oh, okay.
So I just want to share that. Thank you.
Cool. And then I have a raised hand here. We'll go to Denise first. So Denise, I think you're live.
Thank you. To go back to the blackberry bush, you had 4 different plants up, and one was called blackberry. We have that in our front, and it was planted by the builder. We have direct sun all day, the entire day, and it's very sparse throughout the mulch, so it just looks like a dead spot in our yard.
It's probably just getting too much sun. I would dig it up.
Always looks burned.
What's that?
It always looks like it's burnt.
Yeah, it's probably too much sun. And, you know, I dig stuff up in my yard and move it all the time, to my family's chagrin. You know, I'm always like, hey, we're digging a hole today. We're going to move this plant from here to there because I planted it in the wrong place. So don't be shy to move things. Try it in a different place. I think it's too much sun. I would move it. Put some phlox there.
Okay. Yeah. We can't really move anything without HOA approval, even little plants in the beds, but I think they just planted it in the front and didn't take into account the sun, because it's just, it's a sad little plant. So we'll work on moving it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Yep. All right. I'm going to go to Randy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so
Oops.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so back to the cardboard question. So that's one of our biggest frustration. We have, I don't know if you consider this a lot, but we take like 12 cubic yards of mulch to remulch our yard each year. And we are trying to, I have a two-part question. I'm wondering if I can replace some of that area with ground cover to minimize how much mulching we need to do. And would ground cover kind of choke out the weeds or prevent weeds from coming through? That's my first question. And then if I do use a cardboard, do I move the existing mulch, put it down, and then put the cardboard back over it? And would I need to do that for the ground cover?
So when I think about using the cardboard, it's usually for a new planting area. If you wanted to put it in an existing place, then yeah, you should bring up the mulch that's there, put the cardboard down, and then put it on top of it. To me, that's just too much work. I just keep throwing mulch on instead of dealing with the cardboard.
Okay.
And pulling the weeds. Once that ground gets a little softer, as you get the soil healthier, it's a lot easier to pull the weeds.
Okay.
And then for the ground cover, you know, yeah, if you get the right ground cover, it should choke out the weeds. If you can find something that's evergreen, you know, like that moss phlox, that is really good, or a shrub that might help. Is it a sunny or a shady spot, or just all the spots?
Well, of course, you know, we definitely have some more problematic spots. The one of the most problematic spots, I think it's southwest facing, so it gets a lot of sun. I feel like during the summertime, I'm having to pull weeds every other week, and they come back faster than I can pull them out. So we're really trying to get creative with making that area look really nice without just tearing everything out.
Yeah, so that's, you know, that's kind of the hard part too, in that, you know, one of the things that we've been conditioned to think looks nice is having our plants not touch, and then you've got to pull the weeds from between them. But, you know, if you can let your plants touch and fill in with ground covers, or
Right.
you know, a great one is carex, the carex species, or sedges. You know, they fill in and they'll touch, and they do look very nice. And a lot of them are evergreen or semi-evergreen, depending on the winter. It saves a ton of mulch, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think I'll reach out to you after and just get more specific, because I didn't have a chance to submit any photos. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. All right.
And Julie, we have
That was great. Yeah.
Okay, Julie, we have one question here. Would you consider planting blackberries or raspberries invasive?
So there are native blackberries and there are native black raspberries, which I have not grown them in my own yard, so I can't really speak to how aggressive they'll grow. But I did just get some in the nursery in the last 2 weeks, so I'm hoping that there'll be some left for me to plant when I get around to planting things.
Yeah, she says about actual edible, but I mean the wild ones are edible too, but they can get fairly rangy, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure they can, because they all grow by canes that come up. And I worked on a project once where they had just regular raspberries growing, and they were constantly pulling them out of their walking paths. So yeah, I think it depends on the species. Sometimes they have cultivated varieties that stay a little more managed, but I'm not real sure on that one. All right. Okay. I'm not going to say your name right, I'm sure. Prethia Desari. Oops. I'm trying here.
Hi, Julie. Yeah, good question, and you've been really helpful through the emails as well. My question is, our backyard has a lot of sun, so if we have to plant any tree that slowly grows and looks good and also provides a lot of shade, do you have any suggestions? Because currently it's very hot. It's going to be very hot at least.
It is hard. River birch will grow very fast. And a couple things about planting trees. E.O. Wilson, who's a famous ecologist, once said the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is now. But you know, they're sort of slow growing. There's some fast growing ones. Tulip poplar grows fairly quickly, but it's still going to be 10 years before you have shade. River birch grows fairly quickly. But that said, the smaller you can buy a tree, the better. And people always say, but if I buy a big tree, it's going to grow faster. Well, not necessarily. Smaller the pot, the easier the hole to dig. But if you can buy a tree that's maybe 2 or 3 years old, so about a 2 to 3 gallon pot, and you have that choice between that 2 or 3 gallon pot, which is maybe a 5 or 6 foot tree, or a balled and burlapped huge thing that's maybe 15 feet tall, go with the 3 gallon one, because they've done studies that when you transplant something that large, it has a huge amount of transplant shock, and it'll take 5 to 7 years for that large tree to get over that shock before it can ever start growing. Whereas that smaller tree has almost no shock when you plant it, and it starts growing from the get-go. So after 5 years, that small tree is actually going to be bigger than the bigger tree that you planted. So, and you can look up, a lot of times for information, I use the Missouri Botanical Garden. They have really great information, and a lot of times they'll tell you how fast trees grow. So you can use that in your research to find a fast growing tree also. But oaks are the best because oaks support the most species. But you'll have to do some research there to find out which one will grow best in your yard and what you want to deal with as far as growth rate.
Oh, that was really helpful, Julie. Thank you.
Sure.
I didn't know that. I was always thinking maybe we should start planting a tree that is tall enough so that it grows in quickly. But thanks for that information.
Yep, no problem. All right. Let's see. Anu? I'm trying to unmute here. And that's not.
Hi, Julie. This is Anu.
Hi.
I didn't actually have a question, but I just wanted to comment. This is wonderful. This was so helpful. And you just got me really thinking about, because we have a tree line with all this mulch, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's so expensive to maintain it. And after hearing all the wonderful things you've shared, it's just, and it could be so beautiful. That's the other piece that really comes to mind. So thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. And I think, like you all too, living in Willowsford is really a bonus because they're so open to native plants. And you've got that demonstration garden close to the farm stand there that you can really kind of see how some things are growing and how they look, and what's going to look more managed, and it's just you're in a good spot for that.
Yeah. I did actually have a question for Iris, because I think one of the participants had said we have to actually get permission to plant small plants. Like if I was going to plant plants under in my tree line in my backyard, would I need to go through an HOA design review for something like that?
I think it depends. If you have an established planting bed and you're just adding plants that are already similar to what you already have, I wouldn't think so. But if you're adding like trees or you're adding a new bed, I would recommend going through the review. And it never hurts just to send them an email and ask.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I will. Thank you so much. Because I'm kind of like Julie. I was like, oh, this sounds so great. I just want to get started. I might wait a moment and just get some thoughts on that. Thanks again, everybody, both of you. Thank you.
No problem. All right, I think Sydney takes a second to unmute here. Let's see, Sydney.
Hi, can you
Hi.
hear me? Hi, thanks for the program. This has been really good. So when I moved into the house, I really hate boxwoods. I like a little wilder looking garden and less structured. So I ripped all my boxwoods and kind of the foundational plants that came with the house. And I then discovered that I'm really a fair weather gardener. So I've got a ton of spring, summer bloomers, but then in the wintertime, there's really nothing left. And I'm wondering if you might have a recommendation for like foundational plants that do really well as evergreens through the fall and winter and things like that.
So for native plants, it's hard because there really aren't a ton of evergreens. The inkberry that I've showed a few times, that certainly is evergreen, and it's got a lot of cultivars that stay small. It has big ones. But don't discount deciduous plants for structure in the winter, because things like 9-bark that has very interesting bark, or Cornus cercia, which is red twig dogwood, has red twigs in the winter. So you can have a lot of winter interest on things that aren't evergreen, but also just sticks that are there. In front of my house, I have Rose aromatica growlow, which is a fragrant sumac that grows very low. It gets 2 to 3 feet tall, but it'll spread 6 to 8 feet. Mm-hmm. And it's all rambly in the winter, and the sticks are going everywhere. I just love it. So, you know, those interesting sticks can also add structure in the winter. But I do think, you know, it is nice, especially in a neighborhood, to have a couple evergreen things in there. And sometimes that might be a non-native species. I didn't say that. I won't acknowledge that I said that. But it is nice to have an evergreen in there, especially at the corner of your house, or maybe one by the front door or something, to add some of that structure. So,
okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, I think we're going to take one more because we're already over time. And so I've got Brenda.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you, Brenda.
Okay, thanks. This has been great. I see there's another dietitian on the call here, which I love. I wanted to ask about the rain garden area. So I'm not sure I heard this correctly. Did you say in the spring that it was wet soil in the spring and then our Virginia dry clay in the summer?
Yes, that's typical of a rain garden. So if you have that area that's really wet and moist in the spring, but dries out and is tough as can be to grow stuff in the summer, Google for rain garden plants.
Okay,
that's
so that would be part of my backyard. But it's so sunny. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, well, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so if you have more questions, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to answer questions. I will just put in a plug that, you know, even with all the virus stuff going on, we're open we're open Wednesday through Saturday from 9 to 2 and until 4 on Saturdays. And we're also doing private shopping appointments when we're closed. You can come and it'll be just you in the nursery. Or we have grab and go where you can email me your order and I'll put it in our little area. You just throw it in your car and leave. I send you an online invoice. So, you know, I'm happy to help you out, get plants any way you can. This has been our busiest year ever because I think people are really getting out in their gardens, and I think that's so important. So I'd love to see you here. We're trying our best to make sure people get their plants. But I want to leave you with one thought here before we all go our separate ways. It's okay we went over since nobody has a commute time. Let's see, it's not going forward. There we go. So as we think about our yards, just remember that at one point in time, 95% of the United States was wildlife habitat. And today, only 5% of wildlife habitat remains, and that's generally in parks. When we think about those parks, they're disconnected from where we are. So we need to think about bringing nature into our own home, because 85% of the United States is privately owned. So if we can bring nature into our own home and connect our yards to each other's yards and our yards to parks, we're bringing all that habitat back. And it's the only way that we're going to be able to really bring back the insects and the bird species. So, you know, when you look at your lawn, remember once upon a time that lawn was habitat. So even if you just replace a small part of your lawn, or even if you just plant one native plant, you're really increasing the biodiversity in your yard, and you're doing your part. So it's a great thing. So thank you everybody for coming tonight and bearing with the reschedule and working with this new way of doing life on a Zoom call. And I appreciate all you guys showing up. It's cool to see how many people were on the call tonight. So thank you.
Good. Thank you, Julie, and a really wonderful presentation. And I'd also like to thank all the residents, obviously for being on the call and for doing what you are doing in your home gardens to help us all create better habitat here at Willows-Ford. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you so much, Judy. That's great.
Thanks, Eris. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.